Love vocabulary. A little corny, but I do think they help you remember it. So what I want you guys to do now is I just want you to try out the matching. It's just kind of a silly little activity to make sure you're still with us and keep you thinking about the different moods being set. So match each term with the image it represents. Don't forget you're being graded today on your participation in this Nearpod and your completion of the notes. So even if you have to try it a few times, give it a go. Just another minute, so make sure you're trying it out for a credit today. Thirty more seconds, so if you didn't give it a go, try it out. Nadisha, Terrence, Josiah, Jaziel, just try out that activity so you can get credit. Thirty more seconds and then we're moving on. Alrighty, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the difference between mood and tone and how to find these. So the next slide is technically the next slide of information. So slide 2 on mood. So this will be going on to your notes. So mood is the feeling or the atmosphere that the reader gets as they are reading the story. So the feeling or the atmosphere the reader gets as they are reading the story. So that goes on those first 2 blanks. Everything is right on the slide. So please make sure you're following along and plugging in your notes. So mood is how you, the reader, are going to feel. And don't forget, as we talked about on that first slide, the tone is going to create the mood. But the mood will be how you, the reader, feel when reading something, or even if you're watching something, how you feel about it. So the tone will create it based on what the author gives to us. We will be able to get a very, clear mood from this, but it will be how you feel. So think of mood for me. So both start with M, how you, the reader, feel. So it depends on the vibe that you are getting. And that's kind of how I like to describe it in my mind is what is the vibe of the story as I'm reading? That is what mood is. So for instance, when we read The Landlady or when we read Lamb to the Slaughter, there's a lot of times in those stories when the vibe or the mood is very mysterious or dark, right? Because they're mysteries, they're suspenseful stories. So a lot of the time, the mood that I'm getting is this mysterious, dark, suspenseful mood. And that's because of the way the author is writing the story and the tone they're taking. So the mood is the feeling or the atmosphere the reader gets as they're reading the story. I did put some examples that I want you to put onto your note sheet as well. So I put a few in there so you didn't have to write them all down. And these aren't the only examples of mood. These are just some. So mysterious, a story could make you feel it could be a heartwarming story, cheerful, gloomy, depressing, humorous, romantic, the way you are made to feel as the reader. So in the little vocabulary video, it talks about how mood follows tone. So they go hand in hand, but mood is going to be how you feel based upon the tone, how the author feels, which we will get to next. I'll give people another minute, but are there any questions so far about mood? We're going to do lots of practice, and then tomorrow we're going to read another short story, the last one of our unit, and really spend our time tracking the tone and the mood throughout. So don't forget mood for me, how you feel as the reader reading this. Oh, I just need to call Nadisha back in. See if that works. There we go. Sorry about that, Nadisha. Must have just kicked you out. All right, so I will post the code again. If you didn't get any of this for some reason, I'm going to move on to tone now, so we do have plenty of time to practice them, but I'll post the code if you need to come back. So please make sure you're following along, putting your notes in. We only have one more slide for notes. So mood is how you are going to feel reading it, the vibe you get. And this is based on the tone, which is how the author themselves feel about the subject matter, the characters, or the setting. So tone is how the author feels. So tone is how the author themselves feels about the subject, characters, or setting. So that first blank is going to be author. So the author sets a tone. They determine how they feel and how they want the reader to feel, which then creates a mood for you. So for instance, the author could have a sarcastic tone where they're poking fun at something. They could have a negative tone where they want us to really think critically or think about why they have a negative tone and maybe take to that. They could have a positive tone about something and therefore make us have a cheerful mood or a lighthearted mood. A tone could be judgmental. It could be neutral. It could be ironic, which again could mean sarcastic. So the author sets their tone, how they feel about a subject or a character or a setting, and that creates a mood for us for how we feel when we're reading it. So I know they all sound kind of similar in a way, but we are going to definitely practice this. And again, we'll practice tomorrow as we read a story, which I think will help put a lot of it into perspective for you guys. So make sure you get down the first, those first blanks are in that first section, the examples of tone. And then the last thing that you're going to copy down is that last little blurb of writing where it says tone, or we can determine tone by looking at the author's diction. So the very last blank for slide 3 is diction. And what I mean by that, and I think most of you will recall this from last year, diction is just a fancy word for words or word choice. So by looking at the words and the phrases the author chooses to write with, that will help us determine their tone, which will help us figure out the mood. So it all goes hand in hand here. So if the author is writing with lots of words like evil, dark, scary, death, chances are the mood is going to be a dark mood. Their tone might be negative or scary or threatening. So looking at the words they choose will help us to think about what is the tone and what is the mood. So I'll give people another minute on this slide. Am I okay to move forward? Does anyone have questions or need another minute? Just let me know.
You can move on. I'm all set. But I think
Thanks.
other people are also
Yeah,
too.
I think people are probably good. Unless speak up if you want me to wait, but if not, I will post the code if anyone does need to go back. So now that's it for the note part. That's all we're going to write down for now until we do some practicing. But there are a few examples I want to work through on the Nearpod. So we're going to do a little practice together. I'm going to skip that video. So on your screen, you should see an example from the story The Landlady. So I know this is from a few weeks ago, but we've talked about this one a lot and the way it did make us feel. So I want to revisit it to practice. I'm going to read it out loud and I want you guys to think about what is the mood being created here. So it was about 9 o'clock in the evening and the moon was coming up over a clear starry sky over the houses opposite the station entrance. But the air was deadly cold and the wind was like a flat blade of ice on his cheeks. So what is the mood here? So use your notes to remember what mood is. Look at some of those examples and think about what you know about this story anyway. You already have kind of an advantage. So what is the mood here? Don't forget it's part of your grade to participate. So just make sure you're filling in, trying this out. If we're struggling, that's how I figure it out and we try again. So we're going to do lots of practice, but I want to see what you think. So think about the words the author's using. Good. Whoever just responded, that's looking good. Think about even if this was a movie and you were watching this scene, how would you be made to be feeling? You saw someone walking down the street in a movie and it's deadly cold and the wind is like a flat blade of ice and he's shivering and he's walking down the street in the dark. What would be the vibe of that? The mood of that? Only one person answered out of 10 people. So please make sure you are participating. It is part of your grade. Even if you get it wrong and we fix it, it's better to try. And I know this is where we always run into some issues, but I want everyone to put in an answer. Even if it is completely wrong. We'll fix it and we will talk it through and then you can change it too. But I want to see everybody trying it. I'm going to give one more minute here. So Ileana, Evelise, Terrence, Kaith, Jaden, Jalen. The only person who's answered is Josue right now. And I know other people could at least take a guess at this. I'll read it one more time. It was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the moon was coming up out of a clear, starry sky over the houses opposite the station entrance. But the air was deadly cold, and the wind was like a flat blade of ice on his cheeks. What is the mood that's being set here? Good, Jaden. So what do I mean by mood again? What is a mood? Someone check their notes. Tell me what I mean by mood.
I think you mean my mood is how the author's writing makes you feel about what's going on in the story.
Absolutely. How their writing and their words make us feel. So I'm seeing a few people now that are saying things like gloomy, cold, spooky. Definitely works. Spooky would be a good one. I think gloomy is a good one because it's dark outside. I remember when we read this, a lot of people said that it was a very dark or mysterious mood. I think maybe because we hadn't gotten the definition in our minds yet, we weren't overthinking it. But right away, when you guys read this, I remember you thinking like, oh, we talked about how it's foreshadowing. that something bad is about to come because of how, it's dark outside. The air is being described as deadly cold. The wind is like a flat blade of ice. So we talked about those words, deadly cold, flat blade of ice, and those words connected to that idea of death. And I remember we said, now we have a mood of, darkness, of death, of depression, of, spooky would even work, gloomy, mysterious. So obviously nothing related to, happy or exciting. And whoever put neutral, just be careful because this isn't how the author feels right now. We're talking about how we feel reading it. And sure, we might feel neutral in terms of we have no opinions, but we're being made to feel a little bit, creeped out and mysterious. So be careful. Mood is how we feel reading it. So again, words like deadly cold, flat blade of ice, the moon coming up out of a clear, starry sky, even that description. It's very dark, it's very dreary, it's kind of spooky and eerie. Sounds like a poem. So what is the vibe being given off? So just be careful here. Keep practicing. So the next one I want you to think about is the tone. So how does the author feel about this specific example? So I pulled something from Thank You, Ma'am. Again, another story we read a few weeks ago, but this is at the very end after she's given him money and has, walked him to the door. So this says, the boy wanted to say something other than thank you, ma'am, to Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones, but he couldn't do so as he turned at the barren stoop and looked back at the large woman in the door. He barely managed to say thank you before she shut the door, and he never saw her again. So is the author creating a tone that is optimistic or a tone that is unwelcoming? So use what you know, even if you need to use a process of elimination here, and tell me what you think the tone is. So what is the way the author is setting this scene up? Do they have an optimistic tone or do they have an unwelcoming tone? So if you don't know what optimistic is, I know you all know what unwelcoming means. So you can also use a process of elimination here too. So read that example again if you have to. Is it an optimistic tone the author's creating or an unwelcoming tone? This is just a click of a button here, so everybody should at least be able to take a guess. So 80% without an answer. So this is a very easy, you just click which one you think is right. So is this an optimistic tone or is this an unwelcoming tone? The boy wanted to say something else other than thank you, ma'am, to Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones, but he couldn't do so as he turned at the barren stoop and looked back at the large woman in the door. He barely managed to say thank you before she shut the door and he never saw her again. So still waiting on over half the class to respond to this. Still waiting on 50% of the class to respond to this. Josiah, make sure you're participating, please. Evelise, make sure you respond. Take a guess. Terrence, take a guess. Jaziel, take a guess. Is it an unwelcoming tone and thank you, ma'am, or optimistic? If you don't know what optimistic means, I'm very certain most people know what unwelcoming means. So take a guess or do the process of elimination. 3, 4 more people here. Does someone want to tell me what they put as an answer? I'll call on someone, but does someone want to tell me why they think either A or B?
I think A. I mean B, because she kind of helps him out. It's not really like an unwelcoming setting.
Yeah, right. Is this story and that's a good way to think of it too. Is there ever a moment in the story where where she's unwelcoming or the author is making it feel like what's going on is a negative experience other than the purse being robbed at the very beginning?
No, I don't think so. I think that she was all open to helping him out and giving him a chance, to see a better future for himself instead of
Ooh,
stealing.
yeah, that's really well said. Because do you know what it means to be optimistic, or does anyone know what it means to be optimistic?
Um,
You kind of said
I
it in terms of like, what does she have for him and for a better future?
You want to, I know what optimistic means.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to think positive about things.
Absolutely. Well done. You want to think positively about things and you're hopeful. You're looking at the glass as being half full of hope instead of, a half empty glass. So you're positive, you're looking on the bright side of things. And so what is
Yeah.
Mrs. Bates looking on the bright side of here? Well done. Nice job. What does she have optimism for in this story? Who knows? Who remembers? Josue kind of mentioned it. What is she hopeful for? Positive in thinking. What about Roger? So at the end of this paragraph here, right? He's struggling to even say thank you, and then it says she never sees him again. They never see each other again. So that kind of leaves us thinking, what about Roger at the end, though? Do we think he's going to go out and rob someone again?
No, we feel like he like understands that he has a chance for a better future.
Right, and has changed. So there's this tone of optimism, of positivity and hopefulness throughout this story. And especially here when we realize that Roger is saying, thank you. Like he can't even think of anything else to say. And we all agree that he's clearly never felt unwelcomed in this situation, right? If
Yeah,
anything, she made him feel welcome. So there was never this negative tone, negative language. Everything has in this story was very, positive, welcoming, hopeful, and optimistic. And words like thank you, looking back at the woman, wanted to say something else is this idea of being hopeful and being positive that there has been a change in him and in his life. So I know looking at small little pieces of writing isn't always the most helpful for tone. And that's why tomorrow we will read that story. But think about again, in this case, we know from this full story that he was never meant to feel unwelcomed. The goal was what you all were saying, which was to positively influence him and impact him, to be optimistic for his future. All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to switch to the assignment sheet that was posted with the note sheet. So if you go back onto Teams, you can actually close out of the Nearpod. We're going to work on a little practice activity for the last part of class, and we'll do some together and some on our own. So let me pause this a minute. Alrighty. So if you go back to Teams, under that very same assignment, there's the practice. So the mood and tone practice 1. So it was posted with your notes. So you'll just want to open that up for the last 20 minutes. We're going to go through 2 of these together, and then I'll have you try some on your own as well. So just open that up. I'll put mine up on the screen. Share mine.